Okay, so we're diving into this whole AI coaching thing for educators.
Yeah, it's a really hot topic right now and changing so fast.
And it's not just theoretical, right?
Yeah,
We're thinking about how it could work practically.
absolutely. Yeah, your school board wants to hear your recommendation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're going to unpack some research on LLMs
Large language models, yeah.
and how they power what we call generative AI.
Right, so think of this as like a crash course on the engine behind AI coaching, cutting through all that technical jargon.
Yeah, perfect. So starting with the basics then, what are these LLMs all about?
Okay, well, imagine like feeding a computer program with every book, article, website you can find.
Wow, that's a lot of data.
It really is, and that's kind of the whole point. LLMs are trained on these massive amounts of text data, and they learn to predict what the next word in a sequence should be.
So is it kind of like that autocomplete on our phones, but way more powerful?
That's a pretty good analogy. But instead of just suggesting one word, LLMs can generate whole paragraphs, even entire articles, that sound like a person wrote them.
That's pretty amazing. But how do they actually do that? Learn from all that data.
It's basically all about recognizing patterns. They look at the relationships between words and phrases and find these recurring patterns, and then they use those to predict what comes next.
So they're like learning grammar and storytelling, but by reading everything ever written.
Exactly. And the more data they have to work with, the better they get at understanding those rules and generating text that sounds coherent and realistic.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how this could be useful for something like, AI coaching. If an LLM can write a story, did it also help a teacher, I don't know, create a lesson plan or something?
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the exciting possibilities here for sure. But I think it's also important to remember these LLMs, they're still machines.
Right, they don't actually understand the information the way we do. They're just very good at manipulating language, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this makes me think of this term I saw, stochastic parrots.
Yes.
What does that even mean?
Yeah, it's a term that really gets at one of the key limitations of LLMs. They can string together phrases that sound good, but they might not actually grasp the meaning behind those words, like a parrot, repeating phrases without really getting the meaning.
So masters of mimicry, but not necessarily masters of meaning.
You got it. And the sarcastic part of that term refers to the random element in how they create text. They don't follow a script. They make probabilistic choices based on patterns.
Huh. So there's this element of unpredictability,
Mm.
which could be kind of cool, but also maybe a problem for education.
Yeah, for sure. And this kind of brings us to another big idea, the role of big data in all of this.
Right, because these LLMs are trained on these huge data sets, right? What implications does that have for, say, AI coaching teachers?
Well, one key takeaway is that just having a lot of data doesn't necessarily mean you have diversity.
Oh, interesting. So even these massive internet data sets might not represent everyone's viewpoint.
Exactly. And that means there could be blind spots that could create biases in how an AI coach interacts with different teachers.
That makes sense. Imagine an AI coach trained mostly on data from really fancy private schools. Would it really be helpful for a teacher in a rural district with very different challenges?
Yeah, that's a great point. And that leads to the question of, how do we make sure the data used to train an AI coaching system is actually representative of all the diverse needs and values out there, in a school district like yours?
Right. How do you even go about making sure it's fair for everyone?
Well, careful data curation is key. It's not just about how much data you have. It's about choosing data that reflects the actual challenges and opportunities those teachers and students face.
It almost sounds like building these data sets is a huge project in itself, like a research project.
Oh, for sure. It requires a big investment. But if you want to build AI systems that are fair and actually work, it's crucial to get that data right. And there's another thing to consider, that data used to train an LLM reflects the norms and language of the time it was collected.
Right, what was considered best practices back then might be outdated now.
Exactly. And this is why it's important to have ongoing training for these LLMs. You have to make sure they're not giving out, advice that's no longer relevant.
So it's like continuous learning, not just for the teachers, but for the AI coaches too. It's starting to feel like we're talking about a colleague, not a computer program.
Yeah, it's interesting how that line gets blurred, isn't it? And that's actually a really important point, this idea that we can sometimes be tricked into seeing something human-like when it's not, especially in a field like education where trust and credibility are so important.
That's a great point.
Welcome back.
Okay, yeah, I'm ready to get into the nitty-gritty of AI coaching.
Right, we talked about what could go wrong, but let's talk about what we can do to actually make these systems work in, like your district.
So going from theory to practice, where do we even start?
Well, it all begins with the data, really.
Yeah, the data curation.
It's not just about getting tons of information. It's about being smart and choosing the right data. Stuff that's relevant, representative, and actually aligned with your goals.
Okay, so if I'm thinking about building a system for my district, what kind of data am I even looking for?
You want data that reflects like the whole picture, your teachers, the students, the different ways people teach.
So it needs to be personalized, basically.
Yeah.
We want an AI coach that can give good advice to any teacher, no matter their background or how they teach, right?
Absolutely. And it's not just about like demographics either. You need to think about teaching styles, curriculum goals, even the specific challenges in your district.
So it's like creating this data set that's a mini version of our whole educational world.
Exactly. Big task, but it's so important if we want to build AI systems that are fair and effective. And remember, this data curation thing, it's not a one-time thing.
Right, because education is always changing. Like what worked 5 years ago might not be the best approach now.
Exactly. So we have to think about how to keep these LLMs up to date, make sure they're not giving outdated advice.
So continuous learning, it's not just for the teachers, it's for the AI coaches too, huh?
Absolutely. This could mean like retraining the LM on new data regularly, or maybe even building systems that allow for real-time feedback and updates, keeping them current.
It sounds like creating and maintaining these systems is going to require a whole new set of skills, not just for teachers, but for like administrators, tech people, everyone.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We've got to invest in training, professional development, make sure everyone involved in bringing AI into education has the know-how to do it right. And, speaking of implementation, it's important to remember AI is a tool, not a replacement.
Right. We don't want teachers to feel like robots are taking over their jobs.
Exactly. The goal is to create a partnership, where teachers and AI both bring their strengths to the table.
So finding that balance where AI helps teaching get better without, undermining it.
Precisely. And one way to do that is through transparency.
Right. That idea of being able to see how the AI system works, like looking under the hood.
It's all about building trust. Teachers need to understand how these things work, the data behind them, what they can and can't do.
Yeah, that makes sense. It would give them the confidence to use these AI coaches more effectively.
Exactly. Instead of blindly following recommendations, they can think critically about the guidance and make their own decisions.
It's like we're talking about a whole new level of data literacy here, not just for students, but for everyone in education.
You got it. We need to give everyone the tools and knowledge to navigate this new landscape. And this brings us to another crucial part of minimizing risk, human oversight.
Right. We can't just let these AI coaches run wild.
Exactly. We need human educators involved every step of the way, from the design and development to how they're used and evaluated. It's about creating a system where humans and AI are working together toward the same goals.
So it's AI supporting teachers, not replacing them.
Precisely. The goal is to free up teachers' time and energy so they can focus on what they're best at. Building relationships, encouraging creativity, inspiring that love of learning.
Now, that's a vision I can get behind. But before we get too carried away, let's talk about the ethical side of things.
Of course, of course. As we build and use these AI coaching systems, we've got to be aware of the potential impact they could have on teachers, on students, on the whole educational system. We need to ask some tough questions.
Like what kind of questions?
Well, for example, how do we make sure these systems are being used fairly? How do we prevent them from reinforcing biases that are already out there? How do we protect student privacy, keep their data safe? These are all really important questions we need to think about from the get-go.
Yeah, it sounds like there are no easy answers here.
You're right, there aren't. And that's exactly why it's so important to have these conversations now before AI becomes totally ingrained in our schools.
It feels like we're at this crucial moment where we have a chance to shape how AI is used in education. But we need to be thoughtful, careful, and know what we want to achieve.
Couldn't agree more. We have a responsibility to make sure AI serves us, not the other way around. But beyond the ethical questions, there's another layer to think about: the human factor.
Right, because education at its core is about human connection, right? Inspiring young minds.
Exactly. And that's why we can't lose sight of that human element as we start integrating AI into classrooms.
So how do we strike that balance? How do we use the power of AI but not lose the things that make education truly meaningful?
Well, one way is to focus on using AI to make those human connections even stronger instead of trying to replace them.
Can you give me like a concrete example of what that might look like?
Sure, imagine an AI system that helps teachers identify students who are struggling or maybe need a little extra help.
That would be amazing, especially in a big classroom where it's hard to give every student individual attention.
Exactly. Or picture a system that can look at student work and give personalized feedback. That would free up so much time for teachers to have those one-on-one conversations with students.
So AI could actually help personalize learning and create a more supportive classroom.
Precisely. But it's important to remember AI is a tool.
Right. It's up to us, the educators, to use it the right way.
Exactly. And that's why these discussions are so crucial. We need to be thoughtful, proactive in figuring out how we want AI to shape education.
I'm feeling really inspired by the possibilities, but also aware of all the challenges. This has been such an insightful conversation. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And to everyone listening, I hope this deep dive has gotten you thinking about the potential of AI in education. This is a field that's changing all the time, and it's up to all of us to make sure these changes benefit all students.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks for joining us.
All right, so we've talked a lot about AI in education.
Yeah, we've really gone deep on LLMs, how they work, what they can do, and all the things we need to be careful about.
I feel like I have a much better grasp on all of it now, that's for sure.
Good, good. And hopefully you've got some solid ideas to take back to your school board.
Yeah, that's the goal. So let's get strategic here. What are the key takeaways, the things I should really hit on in my presentation?
Okay, well, I think the most important thing to emphasize is that AI coaching, it's not about replacing teachers.
Right, it's about giving them more support, better tools, so they can do what they do best.
Exactly. You want to focus on the potential for personalized professional development, targeted feedback, help with those administrative tasks that can be so time-consuming.
Okay, so start by highlighting the positives.
Yeah,
How AI can actually make teachers' lives better and give them more time to focus on their students.
right, exactly. But it's also important to be upfront about the potential downsides. Transparency is key here.
Like we talked about before, being open about how these LLMs work, the data they're trained on, and why we need to be so careful about choosing that data.
Yeah, we don't want to create AI systems that are unfair or end up hurting certain groups of students.
Exactly. And we need to make sure these AI coaches are giving good advice, that they're being used in a way that aligns with our values.
Absolutely. Ongoing monitoring and evaluation are crucial. We can't just set these systems loose and hope for the best.
It's about accountability, making sure they're truly serving both students and teachers.
That's it. And this leads to another important point, this idea of human-AI collaboration. We need to think about it as a partnership, not a replacement. The best systems will be the ones that combine the strengths of both humans and AI.
Working together towards the same goal.
Exactly. And this means we need to think about professional development for everyone involved in implementing AI in education. Administrators, tech specialists, even the school board members, everyone needs to be up to speed on how to use these tools effectively and ethically.
So it's not just about training teachers, it's about creating a culture of AI literacy across the entire district.
You got it. And that includes having open conversations, encouraging everyone to think critically about AI's role in education.
It's almost like we're all students again, figuring out how to learn and teach in this new world.
I like that way of looking at it. We're all on this journey together, figuring it out as we go.
Well, I have to say, I feel so much more prepared for that journey after this deep dive. Thank you for sharing your expertise with me and with our listeners.
It's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed the conversation.
And to everyone listening, I hope this has given you some food for thought, some new ideas to consider. AI in education, it's a rapidly changing landscape, and we all have a role to play in shaping its future, making sure it benefits all students.